Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 intelligent intranet. I'm Mark Cashman, running this intro solo again as Chris races around readying a few Ignite things for some exciting news about Syntex. So can't wait for that, and go Chris. Chris was able to join in the main interview segment, so have no fear. Chris was there, is here, will be here live as we chatted with April in Dallas, Texas. So, on today's episode, we'll hear from April Dunnam, Principal Cloud Advocate on the Power Platform Developer Advocacy team here at Microsoft. April is also a Power Platform MVP alumni and Microsoft certified trainer, and April was previously a SharePoint developer for 10 plus years, consulting out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Woo! This episode brings the live Intrazone breakout session from the 365 EduCon Dallas show right into your Intrazone ears. We asked April to share insights and best practices for user experiences designed to build sticky apps. That's her term, and I think you're going to love what that means. Plus her take on new Power Platform innovations, covering things like Power Pages, Power Automate, the pay-as-you-go model, modern commanding, RPA, and governance with managed environments. That's right, we covered a lot. It was done live, but we're putting it into the Intrazone so you can get the benefit of what is top of mind for April, plus a few tips and tricks that she shared. So, before we jump into it, I just want to say my experience with the Power Platform has been twofold. There's a lot of Microsoft Lists innovation that connects to the Power Platform. If you use Lists as your data source, you can go from Lists directly into Power Automate. There's also some flows that are also now pre-baked into the List templates. You can go from Lists into Power BI and do all the analysis and build out nice reports. And of course, you can build out a Power App, whether that's a Power App that you're going to embed in a SharePoint page or a Power App that you intend to have as a mobile accessed application. So no matter how you slice and dice the Power Platform, if you use Lists as a data source, certainly it brings a lot of value, both in where you store the data, how you get started, and from a experience point of view for users, it's really easy. You just a couple clicks and you go straight into the power of the Power Platform. Now, the other side of it is I recently attended the Power Platform Conference in Orlando, Florida, and it was a really great event. It was one of those events where, kind of surprised, after a couple of years within the pandemic, getting back to in-person, it wasn't just a couple of thousand, it was almost 4,000 people in attendance, and it really felt like it. The community showed up. Keynotes were great, sessions were great, workshops were great, the ambiance really nice. Wasn't too hot in Florida, it was about 85 and just a little humid, but pretty nice for walking around the city walk, getting to see everybody, new faces and old. So really balance of not just the Power Platform tech, but the Power Platform community. So with that, before we jump into the discussion with April, I wanted to share a recent and relevant audio clip from Jeff Teper's Power Platform Conference keynote, which was just again last week in Orlando, Florida. And he followed Charles Lamanna's opening keynote. And Jeff's session focused on building collaborative apps with Microsoft 365 and the Power Platform. And he was joined by a number of different co-presenters. Jeff and his team showcased integrations with Teams and Power Automate, the value of Microsoft Graph, Syntex to help route all your content processing, opportunities to enhance Microsoft Viva, the employee experience platform, and a lot more. It was a really great double punch of Charles and a lot of new Power Platform value and news, followed up with Jeff building collaborative apps, which is really using Microsoft 365 in integration with the Power Platform. In this clip, you'll first hear Jeff speak to 5 strategic fundamentals of collab apps, and then some additional solution building insights from his co-presenter and my peer, Vesa Juvonen, which includes references to Charles. So if you hear the word Charles, that's a reference to Charles Lamanna, who leads our Power Platform engineering teams. And with that, here's Jeff.
So what we're going to talk about today is transformation, how the combination of content and people and information and business applications can come together to help organizations work more effectively together. First, we've learned that people really want flexibility, but also simplicity in collaboration. So we have a lot of capabilities, but they all come together in a simplified solution for hybrid work, bringing together synchronous and asynchronous collaboration, communications, content, files, apps inside Microsoft Teams. And I think we saw in an unexpected way the need for a product like Teams through the pandemic. And so we've got this collaboration shell, if you will, that runs on all platforms and devices. Second is we've matured the development tools. I love what Charles said. This is a platform that's open for everybody. So professional developers in whatever language you want can come to this platform and extend our solutions. But we're dramatically scaling it. We wouldn't get to tens of millions, or as Charles aspires to, hundreds of millions of people creating these solutions without embracing a no-code, low-code solution that's open to any back end, but integrates quite seamlessly with Microsoft 365. We've gotten very flexible content and data platforms. Charles talked about Dataverse, and the progress there is phenomenal. I'll talk a little bit on the content management side in a bit. And so we've got these much more mature data platforms that have a lot of flexibility, security, collaboration, compliance, and so forth. Probably the biggest thing, and the thing I heard in the VB era and a little bit, the first wave of what we're doing in servers and services for Office, is we're taking policy and governance incredibly seriously. These applications and sites would grow and sprawl, and that was wonderful, but it was hard to manage them. And I love what Charles said about helping people manage them from the get-go. And last but not least, it's great for a human being to automate in a prescriptive way a series of steps. That is incredibly powerful. But we are on the verge of a transformation where more and more these deep learning algorithms are going to understand what's going on, understand your intent from just a few words, understand summaries of contents and meetings, and really transform the experience for you. So you don't have to even do less coding or no coding, if you will. So these are the 5 things that are different, and you'll see us embrace these in the years ahead.
Now, what we wanted to talk about a bit, as Jeff said, about the power of the platform. And of course, there are different ways of doing extensibility in Microsoft 365. We'll tie in all of this in the context of the Power Platform as well. But as you may know, Microsoft Graph is really the fundamental API in the Microsoft 365 to get access on files, information, chats, channel information, people information, emails, and so on. It's really a powerful API, one API where you can get access on all of the information in Microsoft 365. And it's actually getting extended even more. And of course, you as a Power Platform user or a developer or maker, you can easily access that information as well. Now, what we wanted to also show is that we want to preach, let's say, the technology and investments which our customers have been doing. Now, we wanted to talk a bit about the vision around the collaborative apps which accelerate business outcomes. So collaborative apps really amplify the modern way of working by bringing the people, the business, the data and insights in the context of the user. So really our vision is that you don't need to move away from your productivity apps. So you are inside of the Teams, you're inside of Outlook or in other locations, and you get access on the business data and business actions directly from there. We really want to build a smarter apps, or the collaborative apps enables you to build smarter apps as its endpoints and provides endpoints for Power Platform as well to surface that relevant business data within the context of where people are working. And of course, it accelerates business outcomes by having the people and teams getting easily access and collaborating on the data which is getting surfaced.
It's important to hear how Jeff frames the strategy, how our tools and technologies are designed to support your no-code, low-code revolution. It is a revolution, and you are here, including that year-round value of community. Whoop, whoop. And I'll add that if you ever want to mingle with a passionate community, like I mentioned before, and learn from the best, get yourself to an event that's dedicated to the Power Platform. Always a lot of great tech to learn, but always a lot of great tech to learn from great people. It'll leave you rich with both technical information and best practices and a wealth of new friends and old. All right, now it is time to get smart, to get deep about the Power Platform, to gain the insights and technology guidance. Here is our conversation with April Dunnam, live from the 365 EduCon Dallas stage. Welcome to the Intrazone. And April, thank you for taking time, flying all the way here for the Intrazone. That's amazing.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. It was a long, 45-minute flight for me.
Perfect. Well, if you don't know, she has gone by many names. I'll let you fill in maybe ones I don't know. But the one that we do know is the SharePoint Siren. And if you didn't know, the 365 EduCon has been before known as SharePoint Fest. So you might see the common denominator there, SharePoint. Can you give us a little sense of what you were in SharePoint Siren days and what you are now as Power Platform Guru?
Yeah, absolutely. It shows my background is in SharePoint. Like a lot of people that are in the Power Platform these days, started in SharePoint 2007 with a migration in my internship. So if that gives you any indication of how long I've been in the SharePoint realm there, but I did a lot of SharePoint development, branding and stuff in the day, and just natural, inclination to move towards the Power Platform and add some automations on top of SharePoint. So I always have a deep love for SharePoint, hence the SharePoint Siren.
So the bringing the deep love, we know that some things derive out of on top of SharePoint, SharePoint being now a little bit more back-end content service. Maybe you can share through the lens of what you create, because I think you have a wonderful YouTube channel. And you've got a lot of content that maybe a lot of people are already familiar with, and that's why they're here to see you and other sessions that you have at the conference. Can you share a little bit about your approach and what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I always try to strive to do, especially, in my work now, is trying to be like a Power Platform advocate, is how can I reach the most people and help educate them and get them up to speed and building solutions to the Power Platform. And I think YouTube is a really perfect medium for that. You're able to just at scale reach so many people and get them quick tutorials. And that's what I tend to focus on is, cutting through a lot of the weeds there and getting straight direct to the point. Like, here's how you do X, here's how you accomplish this in the Power Platform and get up and running as fast as possible. And I think I found a lot of success in that in the YouTube channel and helping as many people as I can with that.
When you were doing your first videos, talk a little bit about kind of where you were and the journey that's kind of led you to Microsoft.
Yeah, I was pretty early on in my career, actually, when I did my first video. I was working at a telecom company, just still kind of learning the ins and outs of SharePoint. So I kind of started the channel, I guess, just a way for me to remember what I was learning. It's like, oh, okay, I did this. I solved this need for a client. I was doing some consulting stuff, and I'm just going to hopefully this will help other people. So kind of the journey of that, I started doing more and more videos. I got into blogging as well, and then eventually speaking at events, which was honestly terrifying for me. I am extremely introverted, and the thought of public speaking was it was much easier to do a video than think about coming into an event like this and speaking in front of people live. So that took a lot, but I think that really, going into the speaking realm of things unlocked a lot of doors for me, and eventually, segueing into the Power Platform, doing more content around that, and getting MVP and business apps, and then that eventually leading into me joining Microsoft and the advocacy team, kind of noting the work that I was doing in the space.
You have one of the sessions here that is focused on Power Apps, but I think the element that I really liked about your title, and I just want to abstract in kind of you answering the question, what makes a sticky app sticky, if that was part of your pitch for your Power App session?
Yeah, great question. So I kind of like that term. So to me, a sticky app, and which I'll talk more in my session, is it's accessible, it's performant, and it's appealing. So those are the three pillars that I try to talk about there. I think oftentimes, when we're building Power Apps, I think user experience might be the last thing that we really touch on. We just want to get it working. Like we got something that's working. It might not, look the best, but it's functional. It's writing to my SharePoint list or whatever it is. And then we kind of maybe go back after the fact and think about, well, is this the most optimal way of a user interacting with my application? And so that's what, to me, a sticky app is all about. How can I make sure that it's engaging for people to use and that they want to come back and keep using it?
One of the things that I think that's the strength of the Power Platform, would love to get your thoughts on this, is that it's not an island that sits off in a world of business applications that doesn't connect to anything. It lives right on that productivity frontier. And so if you design an app without reference to how people actually need to use it, don't be surprised if people don't actually use it. What are some of the gotchas you've seen, other than my experience about designing an app in a vacuum, that people should be mindful of when they're designing and delivering solutions on the Power Platform?
Yeah, there's a few. So I think one, not thinking about your users, first and their experience. So, if you're building an application that people in the field are going to need to use, making sure that, are you accounting for things like they might be out in the middle of nowhere and they need to have offline capability? Are you accounting for they're in a field and there's sunlight and I might need some kind of dark mode so that they can see the screen correctly? They might need big buttons because they're foremen and wearing gloves, and just little things like that, I think that really can make or break the usability of an app. And as well as, the data story. Are you really thinking about what is the usage going to be like of this application? Can it scale, once we have maybe a few thousand people using it and 1,000 records, submitted to it every day? Those are kind of the biggest areas that I see where people run into some roadblocks where they need to reevaluate what they build.
So we're curious, just to take a moment, if anybody out here is willing to share from a sticky app perspective, or even just thinking around how you would approach building an app that you think is going to work for your end users. What is your name?
My name is Felix.
What is your sticky app?
Actually, I can show you. I've been working a lot. Actually, I'm a follower of April. Thanks, April, for all the information that you shared with us. One of the applications that I have, and it's very common, it is not the first one, but I think that is the app that I use to show all the capabilities of Power Automate and Power Apps. But there is an app that it has like a menu at the beginning, and it is for the cell phone, specific for the cell phone. And it has 6 buttons. You can go to see the part of the maps. Then you can see to go the part of the barcode and use it. And also the other part is the VR part. I use the image or the 3D models that has Microsoft sharing the GitHub, and use I can use I show can you take a look? And I put the cell phone and then I send the object. And then that is the part that I think it is a sticky app that I use for all these things, and to show in the company all the boundaries that we have with Power Apps.
Cool. So bringing in an app that obviously does multiple things, especially collecting data or images. And the sticky part is that you're enabling them to be able to basically take an application and bring objects back in. That's very cool. Based on what he was just sharing, is that a common thing that you're seeing? Power Apps, I know, kind of had a mobile start to it. In the SharePoint world, we love things that you can embed on pages. But before we get there, the mobile side of Power Apps pretty alive and kicking?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's, to me, where it really shines, I think. Like what Felix was saying, some of the integrations with mixed reality and being able to use those controls and have a shop floor and being able to visualize how you're laying that out and put your mixed reality controls in there. And barcode scanning, really common for inventory. How many times do we have our phone out? We want to be able to scan and take inventory in a variety of cases. That really shows some of the uses from a mobile form factor and being able to use your native device capabilities through Power Apps. It's all deeply integrated.
If Felix was describing one delivery mechanism, which is our phone, build a Power App that does what you're needing it to do, and of course you can expand and iterate off of that. But one of the bigger delivery vehicles, and I know internally at Microsoft we see it as an integration point, is Power Platform plus Microsoft Teams. And maybe there's just a little, for if you haven't built that type of integration or leveraged Power Apps in Teams, you could give the 101 of how it works. But then the things that it unlocks that Power Apps alone can't accomplish, because with Teams, you can then do a lot more. Just a little framing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's lots of integration with not just Power Apps, but the entire Power Platform in Teams, for sure. So with Power Apps, I think it kind of started a lot there, where being able to take an existing Power App that you built, whether it's optimized for the phone or the desktop, and click a button and add that into Teams as a tab or as a personal application in your environment, which really, I think that's when we kind of saw the need and a lot of people wanting to interact with it that way, because when you think about building software and applications, you want to limit the amount of clicks people have to take to get to the app for their, productivity. So a lot of people are already in Teams, so why not bring the apps to where your people are? So we saw a lot of usage of that, and then translate into Dataverse for Teams, or how can we more natively integrate the Power Platform and unlock ways to build solutions and applications of Teams with a low-code approach, rather than having to know, some of the more pro-dev concepts that you traditionally would with Teams development. So now not only can we build Teams-esque, that matches the look and feel of the Teams landscape applitions with Power Apps, but we can also have automations in Teams to be able to do things like message extensions, click on something and remind me to follow up on a message later with Power Automate, to be able to create Teams bots, which is a really good use case for Teams, being able to have with PVA, embed Power BI dashboards and all that functionality natively, while getting kind of a back-end lightweight version of Dataverse to store your data.
Like, what would you recommend, for some of the most common tasks, for people who are newer to the Power Platform, who are Teams users? Power Apps, I still think it is easy to build, but it's a slightly more challenging place to start than I think doing workflows. What are some of the things that you think people should keep in mind, or some common patterns for some great solutions that people have built using Power Automate in Teams?
Yeah, there's so many different things. One of the things that I love is kind of flipping it on its head that some people did is a workflow-based tool to automate the creation of teams, right? So like, how do we not have teams sprawl and have some kind of approval process behind the scenes? Like, okay, I'm setting up this new team. What is the use case for it? Do we already have maybe an existing team that you should join for that? So kind of using it almost like a governance tool in a way for Teams itself, which is pretty interesting. But then also just as a way to extend Teams, one of the things that was added recently is approvals native in Teams. That's all done through Power Automate. So you don't have to leave Teams. You can upload a document. You can say, I need an approval for this right there in Teams when you're already interacting with your files. So that's another big, deep integration that I've seen as well.
And I've seen approvals, especially when you build them in from a flow. They show up in the approvals app. Yep. They can show up in chat. Of course, they can be in the app themselves. And I think that's the flexibility that I've seen in the Power Platform, and just in general, how you design your apps to meet people where they're at. The integration with Teams seems like a no-brainer. And hopefully the tool set is, as if you're starting to build, or at least conceptually think, how can I bring something like a Power App into a Teams channel or a flow of a conversation? The patterns, I think, from a Microsoft perspective, we're trying to make it so that you have one tool set within mind, meeting your end users where they're at. We may be at that point where it's multiple tool sets coming together, but the design of the patterns that you're describing, I think, are more coming together.
It's interesting to hear the two of you talk about that with approvals. It kind of reminds me, goodness, the first conference I was at was, I think, at Tech Ed back in this city 20 years ago. And at the time, the questions were very, technical for Tech Ed about you've now given us 6 different ways to get to email. There's Outlook Web Access, there's Outlook Express, there's HTTP, there's SMTP, there's a POP client, there's Outlook. Which of these are we supposed to use? And I think we moved away from Microsoft gives you 6 ways of doing things, but you think about Loop, you think about approvals. It's a common central experience, but if I need to arrive at it through email, through chat, through a mobile client, we're bringing it together instead of fractionating it. I think that's great. Thank you for helping to engender.
Glad we could bring that all full circle.
So the next area that we wanted to get into was to talk about some of the latest innovation coming from the Power Platform. And the first one I think is of interest because it kind of falls into, that should be SharePoint. That kind of sounds SharePoint-y. But I think clarity is what I think the question really will lead to is there's a new offering called Power Pages. You all may know that there are things called SharePoint pages. And at the end of the day, they are all sites of some type. Can you help just clarify the role that Power Pages plays, both within the Power Platform and from a customer perspective? When would I use it and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm representing Power Pages with my Power Pages shirt today. Hey. So I'm a big fan of the new tooling there. Yeah, it's got a logo and everything. It's an official part of the Power Platform stack now. So Power Pages actually is really, if you've heard of Power Apps portals in the past, is pretty much the same thing, except it's getting its own first-class citizen product, and it's being made easier for the low-code, no-code audience. So portals in the past was kind of more you needed to know some pro-code language, like HTML, JavaScript, all that, to really build a portal. With Pages, that's taking it back to the low-code, no-code mentality of the Power Platform, giving you a very easy way to drag and drop controls and build a site. And now the use case for this is when we think about Power Apps, and we have model-driven apps and Canvas apps and all that, those are more meant for internal app business line of business consumption. So within your environment, within your tenants. Power Pages, on the other hand, is what if I need to have a website that maybe I might have anonymous users access, or maybe it's, other vendors that we interact with where you might need to have like authenticated access, but it's not just for the people in my company. That's the benefit, and that's what Power Pages solves for us, is that interaction in a kind of really scalable, governable website that you can have backed by Dataverse and being able to integrate with all the other Power Platform pieces easily. So to me, in my opinion, it doesn't really conflict with SharePoint, because SharePoint's more for, it's an intranet. This is more for public-facing kind of consumption. Power Pages falls.
So you just introduced a term. I want to make sure our audience is keeping up with it. So you mentioned Dataverse. Could you tell everyone what is Dataverse? Yeah,
Dataverse is the data platform that powers all the Power Platforms. So whether or not you're actively storing your data in Dataverse, you're using it in some capacity if you're using approvals and all that, and some of these basic Power Platform functionality. So what that gives us is a relational, so if you think of server like SQL Server, it's a relational database, data storage repository where it's secure, governable, all that, where you can store your data. So it's deeply integrated with all of the pieces of the Power Platform, model-driven apps, Power Pages, Canvas apps can use it. So just a place, another place where we can store our data, basically, in addition to SharePoint and other data sources.
The next area is the thing I know the least about, but I think is actually one of the biggest things that we've announced recently, which was this notion of Power Automate and pay-as-you-go. And I also am curious, before we announced it, was the only availability pay-as-you-stay? Just kidding. So with Power Automate, pay-as-you-go, why is that a big deal? A, maybe what is it? B, why is it a big deal?
Well, it's a big deal because when we think about how we license and use Power Automate flows in the past, it was all kind of like a per flow or a per user model, right? So it was a licensed model. So this with the pay-as-you-go is giving us a consumption model, which is really highly requested. So we had it in Power Apps first. So they had Power Apps pay-as-you-go where we could do that. And now we're getting it as well in Power Automate. So really giving us a way where we don't have to know from the start what kind of usage we're going to have of an automation, which was always a problem with the current, licensing model in the past. So you kind of had to know up front, like, okay, how many people are going to use this? Does it make sense to do a per flow or per user license and all that? Now we can do a pay-as-you-go, and it's just all consumption. It's based off of the amount of runs that you have of your flow, and then you can scale up, scale down as needed. And then once you get maybe mass adoption, you might switch to a different model. So it just makes it really easy. It gives you a better starting point when you're not quite sure the amount of usage that you're going to have, and you want to start maybe even stay with a consumption-based approach.
So why are we doing that? Like, who benefits from that? Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so again, it's more like if you're testing something out, right? So that big benefit there, and you're not sure like what kind of consumption you're going to have. But then also for those larger scale processes that might not be, going all the time. So maybe you have like an end of year process that runs and does all these automations. Well, it doesn't quite make sense to license up 2,000 of your employees so that they can run an automation that runs once a year. And that's really the only automation that they'll need access to run. But a pay-as-you-go model makes total sense. So it's going to run once a year. It's just going to run on the consumption. And so those are kind of the big people that, cases that would benefit.
I would say, and you can correct me if the parallel is not accurate, but in SharePoint many, many years ago, for storage, it used to be that you would have to allocate a certain amount for a site collection. Allocate. And then if it never got used, you never really got it back. So you were almost like wasting space and in context, wasting a little bit of your value of how much storage you had in Microsoft 365, then Office 365. So this consumption model is like we now do with storage today. You have X, but if you're not using it, other people can. Yep. So it balances out how much you're investing, but also hopefully the value of actual use.
Exactly.
Another thing I know that's coming up, I'm going to ask you about, Mark, true or false?
Oh boy.
So modern commanding, true or false? Modern commanding refers to a gentleman wearing black and white clothing with Helvetica on it giving orders. True or false?
Absolutely true, as long as that gentleman is Richard Gere. So if we're not in the movies, and we do want to know what modern commanding is as far as a recent announcement for Power Platform, truly, what is it and the benefits that it brings?
But modern commanding, really all it is it's kind of about that bringing, again, low-code, no-code functionality to model-driven apps. So I don't know how many people listening or here have built a model-driven app before. My background is more on the Canvas app side of things. But model-driven apps, traditionally, to do things like we have a command bar where we can add a new item, edit items, and that was customizable. But again, you had to know JavaScript, you had to know HTML to really be able to customize those commands. Now with modern commanding, you can use PowerFX, which is the low-code Excel-like language that we have for Canvas apps, to build those commands. So it really is reducing the barriers to entry to customize your model-driven apps even further and add additional commands with the low-code, no-code PowerFX language.
Yeah, I think that's great. I remember, back in 2017, where one of our community members was describing the vertical learning curve of Power Platform, because it was like super, super, super easy. There's one thing, okay, and now it's off the charts, and it's like you might as well be writing full code.
Yep.
So we're bringing down that vertical learning curve. For the folks who are listening to this on broadcast, this is the power of radio. The building that we're in, the Irving Convention Center, looks like one of those giant rusty sandcrawler things from the Star Wars movies. At this time of year, the ground is all nice and brown and sandy with the summer heat. So it even looks like you could be in Star Wars surrounded by robots. But RPA actually is related to robots. And April can tell us how.
I was just about to say, before we get to the real topic card, we're going to on-hover April and see what this topic card tells us, what RPA stands for.
Yeah, so it stands for Robotic Process Automation. So it is about robots. Really what it is when we think about Power Automate and how we've used it in the past, it's all about having some kind of API to connect to, and then you're doing some kind of automation on that. So it might be the SharePoint, API, OneDrive, first and third party services and all the connectors. Well, what if what you're trying to automate doesn't have an API that you can easily get to? Well, that's where robotic process automation and Power Automate Desktop steps in. So that gives you a recorder that you can run on your device, and basically anything that you have on your device, you can automate. So this could be used for things like web scraping commonly. If you have to get every month information from a website that doesn't have an API, you can pull it down. It can be used for simple concepts as copying information from one Excel sheet to the other and doing some manual manipulation and all of that. Anything really that your heart can imagine that you want to automate, you can run this recorder, go through the automation, and it can either, there's attended and unattended automations, depending on whether you want to kind of click a button to have it go through the process or have it be truly fully automated and just run the process at a set increment of time and kind of integrating it with the current cloud flows that you might have.
So it really extends the toolkit of if you have maybe legacy systems or systems that maybe don't have a real interface from a modern interface.
Exactly. Yeah. So think of, console applications, legacy servers and things like that, that you might not think you can automate, but you can.
And similar to what I think we were looking at over here is there's some element of people are building a lot of solutions, and there's a lot of apps out there, and it's good to enable, people to be able to build the solutions that they need, especially if the low code, no code impact is not going to take down the farm or, disrupt business. Yet there still needs to be a level of governance. And I think that's what I heard a little through, you sharing. There's a new element that is, I just want to read it, governance with managed environments. What does that add to the Power Platform that it helps bolster this notion of build your apps for sure, but not freak out IT?
Yeah, I think if anything, a repeating pattern we're seeing for a lot of the new stuff coming to the Power Platform is reducing barriers and making it easier. So this applies to governance as well and administration with these managed environments. So we have the Power Platform Admin Center, which we can do some things like kind of see the apps and the flows that we have and do some data loss prevention policies and things like that. And then we also have something called the Center of Excellence Toolkit, which is basically a set of tooling built on the Power Platform for the Power Platform to help you extend the governance capabilities. So it has nurturing components on it, like being able to, set up training for the Power Platform, and then also more reports and dashboards and all of that to be able to better manage it. Now, the kind of consistent feedback or thing with all of those capabilities is it's a little bit difficult to get it all set up and running exactly how you like it. So managed environments are kind of solving that need by giving you daily summaries that you can set up through a managed environment. You can make one environment a managed environment, which at that point, everything in it kind of becomes premium. So you can take full advantage of the functionality of these managed environments. You can set up a weekly digest. You can do things like easily set different data policies and restrict how things can be shared. So to an earlier point, I can create stuff or I can edit stuff. I don't even know if I have access to it. Well, you can say you can only share an app with different security groups, or you can restrict, I can't share this app with more than X number of people. These are the things that are easily unlocked in a very simple to use kind of admin interface with managed environments.
Can you help our audience who may not be as in depth on the Power Platform understand what an environment is and what are some of the patterns? Why an organization, why wouldn't you just put all your apps, all your data in the same environment?
Absolutely. So an environment is basically just a logical data and security boundary inside of the Power Platform. So think of it, I guess, in a way like a site collection in SharePoint, right? If you're trying to equate it to something SharePoint related. So the reason why we want to have different environments, if we think about, traditional application development, you generally always have an environment where you're developing in. You have an environment where you might push for testing, like QA for people. And then you have an environment where you push that into what's called production. That's where the people or the employees are actually going to be using your application. So any application that you're building, you really want to follow that kind of life cycle, that methodology. So we can do that with environments. Being able to have one kind of sandbox place where we're developing stuff that we might not be ready for production use, moving that all the way to production, but then also as a way to maybe separate resources out based off of geolocation. So you might have different solutions based off of your people in the US versus people in Europe. So there's many different ways that you might utilize these environments and why you want to split out based off your data and security layer on the applications and solutions you're building.
Thank you.
So we wanted to take a moment to do questions for April. First, just let us know a little your name and where you're coming from, and then question for April.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Robinson. I'm from Southwest Airlines. My question relates to a topic that you just brought up about the Power Platform, COE, and the managed environment. You had said something that I just wanted a little bit more clarity on. You'd said you can set this up as one managed environment. Are you only limited to one managed environment there, or can you have multiple managed environments? I'm thinking about that specifically as you talked about having different geolocated environments and making sure that if I have like a dev, test, and production, and I'm thinking about different geolocated environments, that I have the ability to separate those out and have different production environments that are managed.
Great question. So you're not limited to a single managed environment. It's just a matter of going into the admin portal, saying this environment, I want it to be managed. The only distinction is if you make an environment managed, then every solution, every app, every flow that you have in that environment then becomes premium, so you need the right licensing. So you just want to be careful when you're using it that everything that you have in there, it's no mix and match, like if you don't have that enabled of non-premium and premium solutions. That's what I was getting at there.
This looks like we got one more.
Do you have any advice for managing test data in different solutions so that you're not doing tests on your production data source?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things that was released fairly recently is the concept of connection references. So this was kind of like a pain point when you're talking about moving between different environments, and you might have, say we're using SharePoint as a data source, right? Since we're on the Intrazone, you might have a test SharePoint list, and you might have your actual production SharePoint list. So with these connection references, we're able to create a Power App in our, say, dev environment, have it point to the test list, but have a connection reference to our production list so that when we move it over to the production environment, we don't have to change anything in our app. It just updates the connection reference, and we don't have to worry about removing, doing all that manual stuff that we would in the past, thanks to connection references, which your app has to be in a solution to use those connection references. So I will say that's kind of the practice that I use to make it easier to separate between.
There's a couple of things I would just add to that, which are you have this sort of natural migration of applications and services begin in dev, move to test, move to prod. And in most cases, you're tightening down security restrictions. When you look at how data interacts from prod to test to dev, sometimes there's a natural backflow, that you take production data and you may scrub and clean it. It all is going to be based on your actual application, because sometimes you need something that's live. You may need a daily summary row in one of your tables for the application to work appropriately based on your architecture. So you have to consider some of those things. You also have to be mindful of those security constraints. A firm that shall go nameless that I was involved with more than a few years ago, but they were taking their production customer database, which was highly locked down, and copying it to test and copying it to dev every night, including like 1 million credit card numbers and social security numbers. And it wasn't on the public interwebs, but it was just wide open. And so in those cases, we brought in some extra abstraction to change everyone's social security number to 9 ones, change it, remove all the names, and just had a pattern so that they could get that. It really depends on the course of your application. I'm describing something that is usually a much more complex data model than what you're going to see with Power Platform, but the principles still hold.
So we wanted to also get some tips and tricks out to you and anybody listening that are specific to what you've learned, whether you teach it every time, whether it's really current, something that you've discovered that's helped you in the deployment of apps, design of apps, how they integrate. Pick and choose, but what are your top 2 or 3 power tips, power tricks that you would share that's going to help somebody the next time they dip into these tools?
Yeah, I would think going back to the previous discussion on, model-driven and Canvas applications, I think traditionally it was kind of one or the other. Well, that experience is really being kind of combined into, we can easily create one holistic application. So I would say one pattern I see is maybe trying to create kind of a back-end admin management application in the Canvas app. I would say these days, that's way better suited for a model-driven app. So I'd say from the start, if you can, evaluate what your need is. Is it a mobile application that our users are going to be interacting with? Yeah, great, use case for our Canvas app. But there's a back-end component to that where I just need to be able to filter the data, maybe export it to Excel, all that kind of stuff. That's way better suited for a model-driven app. And with some of the new functionality that came out, we're able to interplay the 2 different Canvas and model-driven. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. We can embed a Canvas app in a model-driven app and have those work together. So really think about, what your data story is. I think from the start is my tip. Ideally, I think the point was made, model-driven might be a little harder because you do have to have your data down. But if you have that down from the beginning, it's going to make everything else so much easier. So that's the biggest tip. And then, of course, just don't forget about the user experience. Try to hold your Power Apps that you're building to the same standard as you would like your public-facing website. You paid, probably a lot of money and attention to making that look good and appealing for your customers. The same should go for the Power Apps you're creating.
So April, how can people follow you? What are some resources you'd share? We'll put them in the show notes.
YouTube.com/April Dunnam. So that's my YouTube channel. I had a lot of Power Platform content, and as well as Twitter, at April Dunnam. Kept it pretty simple, first and last name. Pretty active on there. So if you have any questions, want to reach out with anything, you can reach me there.
Thank you for being here for the whole conference, and for Chris and I's purpose for being on the Intrazone.
Thanks for having me.
And also thank you to our audience for being part of the Intrazone. After being locked up for so long, it's great to do it live. So.
Thanks to you.
Always great to hear from April Dunnam. She does so much for the community in all of her outreach, and it was really great to get some time with her on stage with Chris to learn everything that she knows and was willing to share about the Power Platform, which, as you heard, was a lot. So underpinning this episode was events. April at an event, 365 EduCon, Dallas. Jeff and his team at the Power Platform Conference. So let's turn and talk about more events, some that are happening literally right now. And I think they're just worth mentioning because even if you maybe are too late to attend them, you should know about them and put them on your flag list for next year or the next iteration of that same event team. So first up, happening right now in Mainz, Germany, September 26th to the 28th is the European Cloud Summit. They've got a number of great keynote sessions, workshops. It kicks off and looks like a really great location. It's one of those locations that's a bit of a destination event, not just an event in your city. It's a one that if it's outside your city, it'd be worth traveling to. Get a trip to Germany, but also get a trip with a lot of great speakers. Hit their website and you'll see what I mean. If you want to go to another event, they've got a couple of events that this team runs, and certainly looking to get up to speed on all things cloud, AI, and everything that you can do in Azure. It's a great show. Next, also almost at the exact same time, is the 365 EduCon in Chicago. This is September 26th through the 30th. This is the same team that brought you the Dallas show, the Seattle show, and certainly a lot more to come next year. So if you're in the Chicago region and it's a last minute, like, oh, I didn't know that was happening, get out there. And if not, you should just know that 365 EduCon team puts on a lot of great sessions, keynotes, workshops. It's a very regional focus, so you also hear from a lot of customers and partners within the region. And I'm pleased to say that I know the couple of keynotes that Kathy and Liz put together, and Jason, Wes, and John really give you a balance of a great look at Microsoft 365 and a great look at the Power Platform. The combination of those keynotes together looks like it'll really be a great offering. Just a couple days later, this same week, if you're listening to this in the first week that this is released, is the Teams 10X Virtual Summit. This is September 28th through the 29th. And if you didn't get it from the title, it is a deep dive, virtual deep dive into Microsoft Teams. All things, all levels, lots of great coverage. I just took a perusal at both speakers and sessions, and it covers everything that you'd want, from meetings, from phone rooms, and all the stuff that you can do with Teams and collaboration, working with a variety of integration points with the Power Platform, with Microsoft 365. I even think there's an element of what you can do with Microsoft Lists in Microsoft Teams. So Teams 10X, September 28th to the 29th, virtual only. Just around the corner, and it now does feel literally around the corner, is Microsoft Ignite. I won't drain this too much. There's a great link. There's now a lot of information about the show that you can go learn. This is October 12th through the 14th. There's a virtual component, which is the majority of content, and I think where a lot of people will engage. There's also an on-site presence at the Seattle Convention Center, and that will be about 3,500 people, some by invite, some by general registration. First come, first serve. The registration is open. If you didn't know, hit the site, register either for virtual or for the chance to be in person. And there are also 6 regional spotlight events that are being driven by the Microsoft field to connect locally in 6 different regions. And it's pretty broad spectrum across the world. And my little window into Ignite, I've been working with a lot of the teams that are putting together the breakout sessions, working on what we call the theme sessions, which are a little bit broader. There's a theme session for Microsoft 365. There's a theme session for Power Platform, and on and on. And it is going to be a big week for news, a big week for adoption and use in terms of the next level of innovation that's coming and how to deploy it. And of course, there's going to be just a lot of great conversation about not only what we announced, but what is in market and how you can best take advantage of it. So Microsoft Ignite is a big show for Microsoft, and it's a really great chance to see what's coming over the horizon for the entire company. Happening at the same time during Microsoft Ignite, not too far away from Seattle, in Branson, Missouri, if you're in the US, is the North American Cloud Summit. Pretty regional focused event with a lot of great speakers and content, and they will have some live components. They're going to have a watch party for different components of the Microsoft Ignite show so that you can catch up on the announcements and then land it with people that can help you understand, well, what does it look like to adopt something like that? I saw this announcement. Well, what does that mean? And I'll be joining from afar virtually for about a half an hour to the North American Cloud Summit just to give a summary of Ignite and to answer questions and engage as best I can from afar. I'm really looking forward to other Mark Rackley inviting me in and me getting a chance to blend in with the Branson crew. Also, a little bit later, October 14th through the 15th, is the South Coast Summit. This is at the Aegis Bowl, Southampton in the United Kingdom. And also a great local show if you're in the UK area and you want to get up to speed on all things Microsoft 365, Power Platform. Check out the South Coast Summit and get yourself over to the Aegis Bowl. Last one that I'll mention here is happening back in the US at Collab Days New England. This is October 22nd. This is in person in Burlington, Massachusetts at the Microsoft MTC, which is the Technology Center. And I know a couple people who host and manage this event, Chris Bortlick and his friends. They always put on a great show. It's a really big, what used to be a SharePoint Saturday, became a Collab Days Boston, I believe, now is the Collab Days New England, as they've collapsed a few of those SharePoint Saturdays within the Northeast region. It is a wonderful event, and what a great excuse to go to Burlington, Massachusetts.
Would like to thank our guest April for everything that she shared. We'll put links into everything she put into the show notes.
If you have any questions for the Intrazone, write us at theintrazone@microsoft.com, or you can reach out to us at SharePoint, at MS Power Platform, at M Cashman, and at C McNulty, a 2000.
Word of mouth is usually the best way to learn about podcasts, so please read, rate, and review, and subscribe at your local Desert Star Wars outing or wherever you get your podcasts.
We are your hosts, Chris McNulty and Mark Cashman, and you've been listening to The Intrazone, a show about more than the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Internet, because now it's all on the Power Platform.